For me, part of the reason why I started my business, which is very much in helping companies start sales teams, build sales teams, hire, train, building out all that management process, was just noticing there is a huge gap.
What's my action step to get to a point where I need setters, whether that's quantity of leads, whether that's quantity of revenue?
Here's step one, step two, step three. A lot of these agencies are not even ready for a setter yet. And they just simply aren't aware of what you need to do or what you need to already have built in your business before you're ready to bring on your first sales rep or your first SDR or your first setter.
You've talked to a lot of agencies, just online businesses in general. Like, what are the top mistakes that you see them doing? Welcome to the Agency U podcast, guys. We have Lloyd Yip here on the podcast. Good friend of mine, and we've actually used him for several of our setters for our agency and also for Agency U as well. So I wanted to bring him on and to share a little bit about, just best practices with setters, and talk about a little bit about his background and unique experience. So Lloyd, welcome in, man. Happy to have you on.
Hey, super excited to be here with you and Austin. And yeah, I'm sure that we're going to be able to go through a bunch of different cool stuff today that for agency owners, I think super important in terms of their scaling of their businesses to the next level, 7-8 figures, all that good stuff.
Yeah. One of the things that I was just saying, like right before we started the podcast, was like about your unique, like you have a very unique perspective, like even in our conversations that you and I have had together, like some of the stuff you've said was like, I haven't really heard from like mentorship and coaching programs that I've been in, like in the online space. So I think you have like a really like unique perspective on that. Can you kind of share with the audience like a little bit about your background and like kind of how you got into like the online space and what you did before?
Yeah, so I think my path into the online marketing, digital entrepreneurship space is a little bit different because a lot of my friends who went into this info product agency world, they kind of went into it straight out of university because they just didn't want to get a 9-to-5. And maybe they bought some course or watched like someone's YouTube channel. And that's literally more or less how they gravitated towards that area. But for me, I actually took a totally different route. I was working in SaaS, I guess, software, corporate consulting, sales for probably like 7 years. So that was me working in like an office and what you would maybe consider more so like a traditional 9-to-5. And it took me like years and years before I even realized the internet marketing space was even a thing. But the nice thing about the corporate world, if you want to call it that, like I work for an early stage startup, but even then, like these companies were already making 10 million plus per year. They more or less had all the processes that you would typically expect out of a relatively sophisticated company. What you learn in that environment is a certain level of like rigor and standardization of all their processes that allow things to work just more smoothly. And it was kind of fascinating for me because when I left that world to start my own business and I started meeting all these other like solopreneurs, if you want to call it that, right? People that are still trying to get from, say, like the 5 figures per month to the 6 figures per month. They don't have nearly the same level of rigor as like obviously a Silicon Valley funded startup company would.
Yeah.
And I didn't really realize this going in, but it was just such a gap. Like how oftentimes people in our little online marketing world would just be so careless when it came to hiring practices, so careless when it came to onboarding new employees. Sometimes they wouldn't even have like any real process around hiring or training at all. And for me, part of the reason why I started my business, which is very much in helping companies start sales teams, build sales teams, hire, train, building out all that management process, was just noticing there is a huge gap between what it is that the internet marketers and the agency owners are doing, who are still kind of like in their early stages, probably below 7 figures per year. Whereas what real, if you want to call it like real companies are doing, which are the 8-figure, 9-figure, 10-figure businesses in terms of their processes, hiring procedures, softwares, automations, all that stuff. So I guess that was where I thought I brought a little bit of a different take in solving this problem to the market, because I was coming from a background where I really do think that like the software world, they're several years ahead of the info product world in certain areas. And then there's other areas at the info product world and the agency world, they're a little bit further ahead as well. Like, for example, remote first. Actually, I think that our industry meaning like the agency, internet marketers, they actually went remote first faster than the SaaS world. Because the SaaS world, they were kind of like married to this idea of having things in the office. And so both areas, both industries do have their pros and cons, but certainly the rigor behind process, the SaaS world, the funded startup world, the corporate world does do better. So that's my perspective, but yeah, I'd love to hear your take on it as well.
Yeah, I see. I have like buddies that have been in like SaaS as like closer, like salespeople. And some of the stuff, like when I see them like transition into like closing for like, let's say like an agency or like a coaching program, they're just like a lot more regimented. And then I feel like they already like they have so much to add to like these companies. Like even when I talk with some of my buddies who've been like in that similar space that you've been in, like they know so much because they've already just been like kind of dipped into like a world where all of this stuff is already built. Whereas like it kind of feels like when you're in the marketing like agency world, it's kind of like we're kind of just figuring it out. And like some people are like kind of more ahead and like they kind of share with the others. So yeah, I've noticed a similar thing. One thing I'm super curious to know, like you've talked to a lot of agencies, just online businesses in general. Like what are the top like mistakes that you see them doing? Like whether it's with like hiring, training, or managing setters, like what do you think that is? That's like a pattern that you like see all the time.
Man, how much time do we have? Because there's so many different problems that I've seen, but I'll give you a couple that I think are the most common and maybe the most like critical. So the first one I would say actually are the early stage agency owners who think that hiring a setter is some sort of like magical pill that'll just fix all their lead gen problems. It's not. Like obviously for me, I run an agency that helps people like find sales talent and bring them on. So a lot of people will submit like a demo request for our business, for our company, thinking that, oh, if we were able to get some sort of like highly trained setter from Lloyd, it'll just essentially allow us to flood our calendars, not a pilot, and we wouldn't need to do anything. But a lot of these agencies are not even ready for a setter yet. And they just simply aren't aware of what you need to do or what you need to already have built in your business before you're ready to bring on your first sales rep or your first SDR or your first setter. So let's say, I'm just going to give you a couple like examples, right? Let's say you're an agency owner, you started 4 to 5 months ago. Most of your clients so far has come from like referrals or just like connections, because maybe in your previous career, you built a little bit of a network, right? And now you're looking to book a bunch of meetings. You, and by you, I mean, obviously this somewhat new agency owner, that person is probably not ready for an SDR yet. And the reason why, a couple things. A, they're early enough in their business. I would assume that they're not making too much revenue. They probably can't justify paying a base salary yet for their SDR. So just purely in terms of financial like capital or liquidity, they probably don't even have the ability to support one. But more important than that, a setter or an SDR can't just come in and like be expected to figure out what they should be doing on their own. Like if a setter comes in, they're probably going to ask you, okay, so what should I do every single day to get you meetings? Because if they can get you meetings as an entrepreneur, then they'll also get paid commissions. And if your answer is like, I don't really know, I honestly haven't figured that out for myself either. If you don't know, how is a setter going to know? So way too many people think that, oh, you can just bring on a setter, yet they don't even themselves have like a lead generation process yet, whether it be outbound or inbound, that has consistently worked. That setter is already put into a position of failure. Even if you're hiring a setter or an SDR who's previously done amazing work at another company, like most likely that person, if you aren't able to at least give them something to work with, like SOPs, scripts, automation tools, a workflow or process that you've already rigor tested yourself and you know that it works, that setter could be the most talented person in the world and they still have a much higher degree of failure. Whereas if you've already kind of like tested out your lead generation processes internally, you already know how outbound works, kind of. At the very minimum, kind of, that you know how it works. Or maybe you already have some inbound leads coming in from your content, and you more or less know that as long as you respond to those leads on social media or on the email or on whatever platform, that you know they can convert them into a deal. Then it's just a matter of you essentially documenting here's step 1, step 2, step 3 of, things that you already know will work to get you meetings, documenting that, giving that instruction manual to your setters. And if the setter is good, then they'll be able to take that instruction manual and for sure turn into meetings. But it's not a magic pill. So I would say that's like the most common mistake that I see, because constantly I'm needing to disqualify people who come into my pipeline because they think that a setter is just going to fix their issues when like they're not even ready to think about a setter yet. I mean, did you want to expand on that before I move to maybe like
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
seen?
like, I was like years ago when I first brought on like my first setter, even though I felt like I had like a really good setter that's already literally done like setting for an agency and they booked like consistent meetings, I was under the impression of like, all right, I think I was a little bit like more like just slightly ahead, that I gave them a script. But then I quickly found out like there's so much more to it too. Like just even like managing them, like training them properly. Like I for sure didn't train them properly. I just gave them a script and like, all right, well, here you go. Like, good luck.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know better. But then then it evolved like through a process of like trial and error of like, now it's like a whole process on like how to find them, how to interview them, and then how to manage them train them and then manage them properly. So yeah, that was definitely, I feel like 100% me. I feel like it's every agency owner will go through that evolution unless they've like heard of content like this to kind of at least guide them in the right direction. Like the default will be to just like do what I did, like give them a script and then like good luck, like go out there and start handling responses.
Like
Lloyd,
way under prepare.
Curious, Lloyd, like when you feel like somebody is like, what are the qualifications of, okay, I need a setter, I'm ready for a setter? Because like what I heard you say was if you don't have SOPs, if you don't have enough opportunities for them, then it's not going to make sense. So like if I'm an agency owner listening to this, like what's my action step to get to a point where I need setters, whether that's quantity of leads, whether that's quantity of revenue, whether that's hours spent doing lead gen, like what is like typical from that perspective? Because we work with a lot of people who don't have setters, but maybe they subconsciously are thinking, oh my gosh, it'd be so nice if somebody could just pop in here and send these 50 DMs a day, to generate maybe one appointment. Like what does that look like? And then do you put it back on them and be like, hey, go send 100 DMs for 3 months and then come back to me, or go turn up your ad spend and come back to me? Or like what are some indicators of, okay, I'm ready for a setter?
I'm going to give you some quantitative indicators, and then I'll also give you some more subjective or qualitative indicators as well. Okay. I would say broad strokes, the quantitative indicators that I'm looking for, if you're below 15K a month, I don't have confidence that the program will work. Like bringing on a setter at below, like certainly if you're below 5 figures a month, I think it would be a pretty dangerous proposition to go after. So that's fairly quantitative. Another quantitative criteria that I'd be looking for, and this one isn't as like concrete as just say 10 or 15K a month, is just lead flow, like enough lead flow. So that, I guess, enough is a bit of a subjective quantity. For one company, enough might be a lot higher than for another company enough, just given LTVs. You could imagine like a company that's selling 50K or 100K offer, they don't need nearly as many leads to justify, having someone working on their lead flow as a full-time role. Whereas someone who's working with a 5K LTV offer, they probably need significantly more lead flow, right? But generally speaking, if I'm working with a setter and they're trying to like be part of my organization and their goal as a setter is obviously to earn a ton of commission, then they're going to be frustrated if we're not giving them enough opportunities to succeed. If you're a setter and you're not making a lot of money, you'll probably just quit in 2 or 3 months. And then you're, as the entrepreneur, back to ground zero. So you got to really think, okay, given the process that I have, given the amount of leads that I have, do I think that the setter is likely going to hit their goal in terms of commissions, in terms of their take-home salary? So if you have enough inbound lead flow that you think a setter can essentially talk to all those people and convert them to say 20, 30, 40 meetings a month, and then of those, your sales team, your closing team can do a good enough job that enough people close that the setter will make a good commission, then you're pretty much good. So you're reverse engineering the math. But if you do the math and you realize, you know what, I probably don't have enough inbound leads that a setter can realistically book 10 meetings a month. And if they're only booking like 5 to 10 meetings a month, then we're probably going to only close 1 or 2 of those. Their commission's not going to look so great. So you got to be realistic with yourself. Like, do I actually have the resources internally so that a setter, if they do well, they're able to actually hit their compensation goals? So you got to really reverse engineer that, right? And outbound, I would say, is a little bit different. With outbound, obviously, you're not going to need to provide leads for the setter, but at the very minimum, you need to have tested the outbound process and you know that works. So like, if you know that given this outbound process that you've been testing for months and months and months, if the setter just hits up like 100 people every single day following this process, they're likely going to be able to book 2 meetings a day, 3 meetings a day, 4 meetings a day. If you've proven that because other people have done it, maybe you've done it, maybe your business partner has done it, then in that situation, then once again, I think you'd be set up, right? So what you're hearing from me once again, if I'm to summarize, you need to be already at a stage in terms of revenue that you can justify bringing on additional headcount and cost. You probably need to have either enough inbound lead flow that it's realistic, if you do the math, that a setter will make good money, or your outbound lead flow, your outbound process has been rigor tested enough that if you just got your setter to follow it and they execute it at a certain amount of activity every single day, they'll hit your goal. If you have those checked off, then you're fine. But once again, the vast majority of people either don't have enough cash in hand to justify bringing on the headcount, or they don't have enough lead flow that a setter who's doing inbound is going to be happy, or their outbound process is not refined enough that a setter realistically is going to be able to hit their goal either. In that case, a setter is probably just going to quit, and then you will have spent the money on them, and you probably would not have gotten a return. So
I like that
that's
ownership
a good point
element of it, and just like, hey, like, how do I set up the setter for success? Firstly, like, not just think about me and my business, and then secondly, it's like, don't shortcut like doing some grunt work for a little bit, and like, because I think that's the easiest thing to shortcut, which is why you're probably wanting to hire setters so that they can test it out. But if it ends up just being for everybody, then it's like you're just setting up your business for failure.
Like something else that I learned, and this is something that I think is quite popular of a saying in the startup world. Certainly, like a lot of like funded startups will say this, even like the Brian Chesky's of the world, the guy who started Airbnb, or like any really big company. If you ask them how their initial year or two was in business, they'll always say like the first year or two was based on a bunch of unscalable stuff that we did. Like, okay, for example, Airbnb, their first customers just came from Craigslist, right? Like Brian Chesky, like somehow manually found some like houses that would be down to list. I would assume he found them through friends, or maybe he just like did some listings online. But then the people that he actually got to plug in to those houses were also people that he just found on Craigslist. And until he got some sort of like momentum with enough volume of people in his, like, at that time, it wasn't even a platform yet, right? But he needed to do all this unscalable stuff, which is like manually talking to all these like Craigslist people who were just like listing homes before he could eventually get it off the ground. So like early stage business owners don't get to do the sexy thing of automating or delegating, or just like saying, hey, you go figure this out. Like, you have to do the unsexy, unscalable stuff on day one. And once you've like solved it kind of, and you more or less know how it's done, then you can justify having someone else do it. But like, people get confused between, oh, I want to automate and delegate something that I don't even know how to do myself. If you don't even know how to do it yet, then you probably shouldn't tell someone else to do it when they are more likely to not even know how to do it, you know?
I think it's the same
just
thing.
A shortcut.
I think it's the same thing with closers too, because I've come across like, over the years, like people that are like will want to bring on a closer, but it's only because they like can't close themselves, and like that's why they want to bring it on. But it's like the wrong way to approach. It's literally like kind of setting up like the business to fail, because then like the closer's not going to close. You're going to invest in lead flow and all that stuff. And then the other part too, like whenever I like bring on setters, or at least in that beginning stage, I always looked at like lead flow, and then also like for me it was capacity. Like I was doing all the setting myself. Like literally I was working like I think 10 to 12 hours, and I was like on Facebook, like sending DMs, like getting at least, I think I was averaging like 4 appointments just on my own while doing like other stuff as well. And then once I got to that point, I got it to the point where it was like literally like a robot can like can do this.
Yeah.
Like it didn't require a whole lot of brain power and it got consistent results. Then I brought it into like a setter. And that's where I was thinking like, okay, cool. I want to get it to the point where I can get the consistency. And then boom, like I brought on a setter. And then they started just like it was
Crushing it,
almost
yeah.
like there was no interruption in lead flow because it was like a smooth handoff.
Yeah, so like actually the inverse of Austin's question being like, how do you know if you're ready, or how do you know if you're not ready? And I gave you a couple like criteria that said if you're below this, don't think about it. Well, what should you be looking for if you are ready to hire a setter? Well, one thing is if you have so many leads that are in your inbox, in your DMs, that you can't even get to them, and you know that you're actually leaving money on the table because you don't have like the capacity to get to them. At that point, you not hiring a setter is costing you money, because you not hiring a setter means that there's like a bunch of people that theoretically would buy, but because you didn't get to them in time, someone else got to them, or they figured out how to solve the problem on their own. Or maybe you just were so busy that there was like a hot message in your inbox that you just never saw. And then 3 months later, you're like, oh, damn, I missed that one. And that's like not a fun feeling to have. Yeah. So when you essentially have so many leads that you're over capacity and you can't do it yourself, great time to bring on a setter, right? And you know what? I know that the topic of this podcast isn't as much about how do you get that capacity, how do you get that lead flow. This is more about if you have a lot of lead flow and you want a setter, how do you do it? But like ways that I've seen many people get to that capacity: paid ads. You guys obviously run paid ads for yourself on multiple channels. Some people have like an amazing organic content strategy, which also can bring in a lot of people. There's various ways, right? But if you're able to actually do the groundwork, which is figuring out where your lead flow is coming from at the top of the funnel, then you are totally justified in bringing on the setter. Now, that's also assuming that you're doing the other things that a setter needs to have you do if you're going to succeed, such as hiring the right setter, right? That's an entire can of worms. And then once you have the right setter, how do you actually manage them? How do you train them? How do you make sure that they're motivated by the compensation plan? So there's other things that obviously need to fall into place for this to overall work. But if we're talking strictly about the baseline criteria that we need to at least have if we're going to even try to do this, then some of the things that I just mentioned are probably your baseline criteria. But I know that earlier, Gilberto, you said that you wanted to talk about the other stuff, the management, the training, the hiring, all that type of stuff. So if you want to go there, by all means, we can hit that stuff too.
Yeah, I think really good components to talk about is like hiring, training, and managing it. So I guess when it comes to hiring, like what are some best practices, like things to avoid or things to like look for in setters when you're in like when you're having the interview, like even how you're like filtering them out. Like I'm sure you probably have like an application kind of process. So what are some best practices to get like the best setters most efficiently?
Yeah, so like for me, I only hire people who've already been in sales for a couple of years. I just don't want to go through the entire process of like teaching them the baseline fundamentals of sales. I would get very frustrated if I was to essentially have to babysit someone. So coming in, like qualifying them in the interviews to make sure that they understand how they can even do a call, doing role plays in their interviews to make sure that they sound pretty poised on the phone, that they ask good discovery questions. Like these are not things that I necessarily want to teach them from scratch. Now, if I need to train them to be better at them, that's one thing. But I think with someone who's already been working in like an SDR role at a software company, or maybe they've done some sort of other like setting work or sales work door to door, it doesn't need to be like a direct parallel. I don't need someone to already have worked specifically in the internet marketing industry. I don't even need someone who's done like digital sales, although that would be nice. You know, I just need someone who's actually had customer facing experience at some point, and they know the basics, you know. Now, if that's the case, then we're already like halfway through the finish line. Now, other things that I'm typically looking for in the interview process, I'm looking for culture fit. Obviously, every company is going to stand for a certain set of values. And then as well, you got to consider, are you going to be able to work with this person? Like if they were trapped with you in an elevator for an hour, would it feel fine or would it feel very uncomfortable, right? So there's some like baseline qualitative stuff as well. If we're talking about the technical stuff, I certainly will dig pretty deep into their actual sales role play, because I think that's the most important part of our hiring process. Like giving them a scenario where they essentially are going to pretend to be a sales rep for a company that we essentially just make it up. We just say, hey, you're representing this company. Here's who they sell to. Here's your products. Here's, you know, a basic overview of the customer you're trying to pitch. Like, show us what you got, you know? So we'll do these like little tests outside of just the personality based questions in the interview. And overall, that gives us like a pretty good sense of, would they be a good fit? Now, obviously, it's very easy for someone to be amazing for the span of an hour and a half period, right? I'm sure you had interviews in the past where people blew your minds, and then in reality, they were not quite as good as, you know, as you thought.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to do that second part. I call it a stress test, because I've had it so many times where they sound really, really like they know how to interview. So they sound really good, like really great responses. And then we'll do like the role play, and it's like, dude, like what?
Yeah.
Like completely different, like what you would not expect. So if it wasn't for the stress test, like I would have hired on this person and they would have like completely like not done a good job. So that second part is super important.
Even if they pass your role play, they could still be bad in the field. So like, because I still think that the role play at the end of the day, it's still technically an interview. So they could just crush it for that particular hour period, and then they might not be so good once they're in the job. For example, like things that I've seen are people just like not showing up to work on time, which that you can't capture in their interviews, right? Things like just being slow, like in terms of doing tasks. It's hard to capture that. Like you can ask, oh, in your prior jobs, like how many dials were you making per day, or how much activity were you doing per day? Someone could say something, but then in reality, like what's going to turn out to be the case? So even after someone passes like multiple stages of interviews, we're still going to probably give them a probationary period, so that we're not digging ourselves too deep with a prospect or a candidate that we ultimately don't think is the right person. We're always going to have volume, right? We're always going to try to get like 100 applications. From those applications, maybe like 20 of them make it to first round interviews. From that, maybe 10 of them make it to second round interviews. And then from there, maybe we just trial 3 of them and we take the best one that actually performs after a 2-week trial. So you need the volume. I would say the best time to hire is when you don't need to hire quite yet, but you're seeing it coming on the horizon. Because if you're desperate for a hire and you're only starting your search when you're already desperate, you're probably just going to end up taking like the wrong person because you're desperate, right? It's better to not have to yet be in that desperate, urgent situation. And when you're there and you already start looking, then it gives you way more flexibility and breathing room, right?
I think another thing that I'm hearing you say a lot is like how much time it takes to hire somebody. I think a lot of people, like especially business owners, they just think about client acquisition. I just need to get more sales, but they don't think about like onboarding, hiring, how important it is, because it takes so much freaking time to do it. And in our space, time is money. And it's like, okay, well, if we're spending our time hiring and onboarding and training, which we'll get into here in a second, but it's like, we don't realize how important it is to set those things up before, like what you just said you need to. Because it's like, if I'm going to hire a setter and I'm like in desperate need of one, then I'm just going to whip up together some interview questions and just, cool, you have a pulse, you can send some DMs or respond to some DMs, great, like you're hired. But it's like you're saying, it takes so much time to find the right person, because like I've done this before, I hired the wrong person, and then it's like they're gone, and then I just waste all that time and money, which if I just would have taken the time to do it correctly, then I wouldn't have wasted all that money and time to do it. What about like the time of training? Like what's your expectations? Like if I get a setter, like how much time as a business owner do I need to actually invest into them for them to have success?
Well, there's a smart way to do it, which will allow you to minimize the amount of training time. I mean, it won't permanently remove it. You'll still have to invest energy, but I don't necessarily think that you should be like micromanaging someone or needing to talk to them like for an hour a day, every single day. I do think that's probably a bit overkill. I think the best way to do things is, before you even hire a setter, try to build as robust of a training manual in your ecosystem as possible. Like, I don't care where it's stored. It could be in Google Docs. It could be one of many project management softwares, Asana, Trello, doesn't matter. But like, essentially all of your processes really should already have been identified and documented fairly in depth in those repositories. So let me give you an example, right? There should be a module in your training library that talks all about your customer and their psychology, and going super deep into like their pains, their struggles, their dreams, their desires, not just like a documented version on, say, like on a spreadsheet or whatever, but even like a video explainer. So like, could you jump on a bunch of internal training calls with any new setter to further detail out your ICP? You could, but what if you were to just like scale your training by documenting that? Obviously, if they were to watch that 30-minute video and go through that documentation and they still had questions, they can still ask you over Slack or whatever, but at least you don't need to constantly answer the same questions again and again. It's the same thing, right? Like, let's say you guys run a process, which is you drive paid media into your Instagram, and then your setter should be talking to all those new followers and booking them to a meeting. Well, could you constantly be jumping on calls explaining this process? Or should you maybe just literally give them the detailed step-by-step instructions of exactly how to do that with maybe pictures and maybe even like a video explainer? And then you can put that into like an SOP and then give it to them. Any new setter should just watch it. It doesn't take any time from you. And if they have any questions, once again, they can just Slack you. Or you can have like 10 to 15 minutes every single day where it's just ask whatever you want. And if they have questions which are still outstanding after they've seen all of your pre-recorded training content, then at that point, they really shouldn't have that many questions. If they still have a lot of questions, despite all of your training content, it's really due to two things. Either you're just missing a lot of SOPs, in which case, build them, or you hired an idiot who either isn't actually like reading or watching your stuff, or they just like keep on forgetting it for some reason. In that case, you probably just fire them, right?
Yeah.
So there's ways that you can simplify the training. Once again, you can't just like fully remove it. You still probably need to spend a certain amount of time every week going through call recordings or going through conversation role plays and whatnot. But like, there's no way you guys should be repeating yourself again and again and again. Simple concepts, because that I actually have seen companies do. And it's like, this could have been avoided if you just documented your training so that you don't constantly have to repeat yourself on calls every single day.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I have agency owner buddies of mine that they'll have like their own like course. Like one guy specifically that I know for his CSMs, he has like a whole like CSM university, and he has like, it's pretty much like an entire course on every scenario, every possible scenario that happens, every like scripts and all this kind of stuff, like onboarding protocols. So it's kind of like having as close to that as possible for like the setter stuff. That way you're not repeating stuff over and over again. That makes sense. Yeah, we have a similar thing for our closers, like in-depth, like client avatar form is what we call it. Like just going in depth on who our ideal client is, what are their struggles, the offer, like in depth, like explaining it, all that stuff. That's really good stuff. Are there any other things like you wanted to share on just like best practices for like training, like anything like from common things that come up with clients?
Yeah, I think something that I had to learn myself personally is the human side of this as well. Like, software doesn't have emotions or feelings, but people do. And it is kind of interesting the degree at which someone's productivity will fluctuate based on like how much they're enjoying their job, which seems so obvious when you say it, but then in the moment, as entrepreneurs, sometimes we're so type A, we just want things to be done. And sometimes the way that we get it is just by kind of like telling people to go do something, which I had to learn firsthand isn't necessarily like the best management style, which gets the most productivity out of a potential employee. So I think beyond all the technicals, right? The technicals potentially being, are you ready for a setter? And do you have the right product for a setter? And do you have the right training and the right hiring process? If all of those things are a yes, then you still got to make sure that like, are you building a team culture and a management process that makes people feel as though they're actual like valued members of a team, so that they want to be there and they want to, you know, do well? So this seems somewhat subjective. So let me break down what elements might go into them feeling as though they want to be in your organization. The most obvious one is like, do they feel appreciated? Which doesn't really take much. You know, like the first company that I ever worked at, they would go out of their way to celebrate their best performers. It's not like they would judge their not best performers. They wouldn't blast them in public, but certainly they would make their best performers feel very special, which hopefully, if you're only hiring people who want to be the best performer, that should be fairly motivating, right? So that's a little bit more on just the people side of things. Can you make someone feel as though they're a valued member of their team? When they're struggling, are you supporting them so that they don't feel as though they're being judged, that they actually are being given additional resources to try to improve if they are struggling? And if you're crushing it, like, encourage them to continue to crush it, right? So that's the people side of things. I guess the compensation might slot in here as well. Someone's going to want to obviously make good money. So if someone's crushing it, give them a bonus once in a while, right? Certainly make your compensation structure and your commission structure fairly incentivizing so that people feel quite rewarded when they are doing really well. Talk to them about what their career goals are. Like, someone comes in as a setter, rarely do they want to stay a setter or an SDR forever. So could you just hire them and never ask them about what their goals are? I guess you could, but I think the person who you hire, but you also find out that they want to become a closer, an account executive, a manager, whatever it is, within 6 to 12 months, and that's actually their motivation beyond just doing well as a setter, and you being able to build out like a little bit of a career roadmap for them inside your company so that they can aim towards achieving a result for the higher purpose of achieving that particular goal, that person's going to be more motivated to do well than just the guy who's like, I'm a setter, and I guess my quota is like X number of meetings this week, so I'm going to aim for that because I guess my reward is maybe a pat on the back and a certain amount of commission. Like, I'm not saying that's not a reward, but there's more, right? Like, we're looking for other things that motivate us to do well in our career beyond that.
I think if they can see the roadmap, like you said, like the vision, it helps them. Well, just like with anyone, like if you can see the end goal, then it helps you push through your current situation. Because like, it's not like setting is like always easy, especially if it's like a dial, like you're dialing people. Like, it's not like it's the most like pleasurable thing to do every single day. So it like helps you go through and like assign a different meaning. At least that's how I kind of think of it. It like helps you assign a different meaning of like, all right, I'm building on my skill set, which is going to ultimately help me become a closer, which will then, you know, once you get to that point, it'll help me become like the sales manager and like manage all the other ones. So it's kind of like your current situation, it just becomes like way more like you just see it in a different light and you're able to perform way better. At least that's what I've seen with like, you know, work managing closers and setters and all that stuff, like laying a strong foundation. And then even just showing them that like you actually like give a crap about like helping them progress and develop as people. Yeah, even outside of the job.
It means a lot, honestly, like for people to feel as though they're actually like cared for and that whoever their boss or superior is genuinely looking out for their best interest. You'll get so much more productivity out of them, which, like, I don't know, there's a reason why I think Google or Facebook or some of these like large companies, they go so out of their way to make their office space beautiful. And like for Google, it's like, hey, you know what, 20% of your time, just do whatever the fuck you want to do. And obviously, like, Google does get some pretty cool products out of that. Like, Google Maps actually came out of someone's like do you guys know about this concept? Like, Google just gives 20% of people's like employment time in Google to do whatever you want. Yeah. So like, essentially, if you're a software engineer, or I think it's not just engineers, I think it's anyone, Google will just be like, you know what, 80% of the time work on like the project that we're giving you. 20% of the time, just do whatever you want. And like, just tell us what you're doing so that we don't think that you're literally doing nothing, but do whatever you want that you think would be fun. Now, simultaneously, that allows people to feel as though like, wow, like I can't believe Google is like letting me and empowering me to like just be the best that I can be. But then sometimes really cool projects get spun out of this like free time. Google Maps came out of this project, as did many other projects where people just like, had free time to explore. But like, you could not imagine the amount of like brand recognition that companies like Google or Facebook get because employees feel like if I go work there, I'm empowered to be like the best version of myself, and people actually want me to tap into my creativity. They trust me. I have autonomy, et cetera, et cetera. So like, we're not on the same scale, but could you come up with like a mini environment where people feel fairly empowered to, do what it is that they're paid to do, but that they're always going to be appreciated, that they're going to be given the space to take risks without ever getting reprimanded, as long as, there's like sense behind their decision making. Like there's all these kind of micro things that, I mean, once again, we could have like a totally separate hour-long discussion just about management, and I'm still trying to become better at it. I was so bad at it initially. I think part of the reason why I'm so like, I look at it from such a micro lens is because I used to be really bad at it. So I had to like pick apart everything that I was really mediocre at and try to solve them one at a time. Maybe like other more talented managers, for them, it just comes so naturally to them that they're not even aware of why they're a good manager. And then it's hard for them to tell someone else, like, here's how to become a good manager. I was a terrible manager, and I had to like find every individual point and try to fix them one at a time. So like, now I actually have a list of things that I see people doing that are like very clear to me, because like I did them all myself at one point.
I think you've been killer. What do you want to go, Gilbert, or you want me to rock?
Yeah, go for it. I'll just do it after this one. Go ahead.
I was gonna say you've been making some like really good points that I think that a lot of people listening can definitely pull some action steps to, but or to use. But if I'm an agency owner listening right now, maybe I have setters, maybe I'm thinking about setters. Like what do I need to be doing? Whether I'm like pre-setter phase, like what's the action step from this podcast, from hearing you, whether I'm going to hire someone like you in the future, or try to find him on my own. Like what do I need to do right now to set myself up for success that I'm not doing or I'm not aware of, so that I can then have a successful appointment setter?
So in the next 5-ish or so minutes, I think what I'll talk about is what someone who doesn't want to listen to the entire podcast, but just wants to get the basics, just listen to the next 5 minutes, because I'll just go through the entire step-by-step process. Step one, make sure that you're ready for a setter. That means you have like a certain amount of cash flow. That means you have like the right product for a setter. So it needs to be somewhat high ticket. Low ticket product just will not work for a setter. That you have like the right internal, capacity, whether that be lead flow or like an outbound sales engine. So if you have those check marks, then you can tell yourself, you know what, a setter system makes sense. Now, if the setter system makes sense, you move on to step two. Step two being prepare for the setter before they are there. That would mean setting up all the SOPs, right? So have a conversation script. Don't make it super mediocre or linear. Like, try to actually think about all the conversations that you've had yourself. I'm assuming that this entrepreneur has actually done some setting themselves, so that they're not just making it up. So make a good script. I use a conversation tree, so there's like a little bit of a branching logic. So depending on what the prospect says, you actually have alternative paths of the conversation. Because I think like a totally linear conversation script is like very rigid and generally doesn't perform quite as well. So I don't want to get too deep into the minutia of like individual SOPs, but like the conversation tree is arguably either the most important or the second most important SOP that you could have for a setter, because it's essentially what it is that they've even saying on the phone or in the DMs, right? The other really important SOP that needs to get set up is like the tracking process. Like, without a tracking process, which tells a setter exactly who they're talking to, when they started talking to them, at what stage in the conversation are they, is that person qualified, disqualified, ready to be booked, have they been booked yet, like, et cetera, all these stages, when should they be following up? This is like super important. Probably 70% of meetings that get booked by setters do not come from the initial interaction. It comes from maybe there was an interaction, and then there needs to be like a follow-up 2 days later, and then maybe like another follow-up 2 days after that. So without knowing who they should be following up with and when, the setter is just going to be leaving a lot of leads on the table. So like, once again, conversation tree, super important, but the tracking, equally as important. I can't really decide if it's more important or less important. I guess the other thing is like, just make sure that you have fully documented your business. Like, what is your business? What is your offer? What is your audience? Like your setter needs to deeply understand your business and your offer and your audience if they're going to have any chance of succeeding. They can't just regurgitate a script. They need to like actually understand the business and the offer and the audience. So like, are there other SOPs that I've kind of left out? Yes, but for the sake of time, those are like the most important ones. So set those up before the setter comes in. Do they need to be perfect? No. You can iterate them. You can improve them over time. The setter will actually help you improve them over time because they'll be using it in real life and they'll be able to give you feedback. Maybe they'll even, if you trust them enough and they're doing well, maybe you'll even just give them the ability to adjust things the way that they see fit. So let's assume that you spent however many weeks and you've set up like your SOPs and you're, I guess, internally ready for a setter. Then you start going out and you start advertising your job. You're going to be building up a pipeline of candidates for a setter, just like you would be building up a pipeline of candidates for leads in like a typical acquisition model. So where do you get your candidates? There's honestly a lot of ways. You can use Facebook groups, you can use paid ads, you can just use job boards. I'm not going to go into detail about which ones. And to a degree, there's probably some industry specificity as well, depending on your business. But generally, like, get a lot of applications because you want more. More means that you have more options. And then, like I said before, multiple stage interview process, psychological screening, which, I mean, sounds kind of more intense than it actually is. It's just, is there a good fit? Do they basically match your criteria? The role play interview stage, super important. And then the trial stage. So I guess you can lump that all into the filtering process. Coming out of this, you're probably whittling a lot of those candidates, hundreds potentially, down to a very small handful. And then from there, you might pick the few. And then after that, it's just about, yeah, like ongoing training and management. And this never really ends, right? Obviously, whenever you bring on a brand new setter, then you will need to onboard. And that's kind of like a unique training period because it's way more intense. Like a brand new setter, you're going to need to talk to them a lot more. They're going to need to like download so much new information into their brain. You're probably going to have to do a little bit of babysitting in the first 2 weeks where you're looking over their shoulder to make sure that they're not making any monumental screw ups. And then maybe they're even shadowing you so that they see how you do the job, or perhaps another setter if you already have other setters. So it is a little bit different if it's like a brand new setter that's just being onboarded. But let's say you have a team of setters already. You're not onboarding anyone new and it's just like maintenance phase. In that case, it's just like daily huddles, not too crazy, maybe like a 10-minute in the morning or a 5-minute after the day is over. Maybe it's just like one full sales meeting at the end of every week to go through a bunch of like sales call reviews, pipeline reviews, conversation, role plays, like those types of things, which you're always going to need to do no matter you have a brand new setter team or a setter team that's been around for a while. Like that stuff will continue to be, So nice. I would say those are like the basic steps. I think I crammed that into 5 minutes. For further insight into maybe some of those steps, just go earlier in the podcast and re-listen, because I think I go way deeper into some of those like tinier steps earlier. But that's like a high level of what I think someone needs to do to be able to install this and make this work properly.
Yeah, for those that just want to shortcut the process, like let's say it's an agency that already is like, for example, above like 20K a month, they are like in that position where they're ready to bring on a setter and want to shortcut the time. Like, I know you have, we've used you for for my agency and for agency you as well. Like, can you talk about like how you shortcut that process and kind of talk about a bit about what you do specifically?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, working with so many business owners that are already doing 20, 50, 100K per month, a lot of them just don't have the time to go through all the steps that I mentioned because it can be a total pain. Like especially the hiring part, you're going through that many applications, that many
time intensive.
Like, yeah, people don't even necessarily know where to find the applicants to begin with or how to conduct the interviews. So I get that. In that situation, we're more than happy to help out. Not only will we do like the sourcing of the candidates and all the vetting as a done for you service, we'll also train them. We'll build out your SOPs as well, because many of our clients come to us and they don't actually have like instruction manuals that are ready for a setter. They might have like an idea of how their business generates leads in their mind, between the founder or the co-founder. It might just be in their brain somewhere. But for them to be able to scale this, it needs to be like documented. And this is like where I really saw the biggest disconnect between the agency info product online world versus like the SaaS world, where it's like funded companies. A lot of like info product agency people, like they just have processes like in their brains, and then they try to like hire someone and then they'll tell them, here's how I do it, which is like asinine. It doesn't make any sense. Whereas in the SaaS world, if something is just in your brain, but it's not like listed somewhere, it essentially doesn't exist. So like SaaS is really good at putting everything into documented manner. And that way, whenever new employees come in, they know exactly what needs to be done. And there doesn't need to be like detailed explanation unless it's just like further elaborating on things that were already documented in the SOPs. So I think like the more rigor that even info and agencies can bring into their organizations, like not saying that you need to start getting like funded from the Valley or try to like operate in the way that like a software founder would, but at least take their rigor and their attention to detail into your business, because I think that can only help, right?
Absolutely.
We shouldn't be operating out of our brains. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense.
It's hugely inefficient. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, if someone wants to reach out and connect with you, like what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I can be found on most social media channels. LinkedIn, I'm spending a lot of time on these days. My name is just like Lloyd Yip, so you can find me.
I saw you're on Twitter as well.
Twitter, I'm not as often on there just because I gotta like parse my time, but I am on Twitter. I'm on technically like Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. YouTube is probably where I spend the most amount of time in terms of content creation, but obviously on YouTube you can't really like have back and forth conversations.
Yeah.
So if you want to check out more content, YouTube would be the place. But if you want to actually have a back and forth chit chat, my name on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram are all good places to go. LinkedIn, I probably spend the most time though. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, usually it's Instagram. You're saying LinkedIn. Interesting.
I think it's just like I have so many B2B business owners that I work with that, but I think you just spend time where your audience is. And for me, it's a gift and a curse that my audience spends time like on every platform. Like I would almost prefer if they just like picked one, so I didn't have to like splice my time across so many different projects, But
yeah,
working with entrepreneurs, like entrepreneurs are literally everywhere. So you just got to be like, for a while, I was spending a lot of time on Reddit too. I don't do that anymore. But for a while, like we were getting like annihilated in the Reddit DMs because a lot of people don't even realize that you can DM people on Reddit. Like we just post content on Reddit.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
DM us. Yeah.
So yeah, man, like, yeah, I mean, once again, dude, I really appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge. Like, I mean, first time you and I connected, like I was super impressed just with like the knowledge you came in. Like, I know when I had expected like, hey, I'm just going to get a setter and like, that's it. But you came in and like, just like taught me a lot of stuff and like really just like really improved our processes. So that's why I wanted to have you on, man. And I really appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge and, sharing with the other agency owners what lessons you've learned.
Yeah, man. I mean, I always love doing things like this. I'm a big proponent of content and brand. So like, I'm appreciative that you had me on here as well. And, maybe one day I'll get you on my YouTube channel and we'll be able to
let's do it, man.
Show some of the cool things that you're doing with Austin here.
Let's do it. Yeah.